The Joshua Tree, U2.
What's been the reaction to the new record?
Michael Madness. You've heard of Beatlemania. This is Michael Madness. Everybody's coming in and buying Michael Jackson.
Bad arrived on August 31st, 1987, and the world stopped to hear it. The pressure was unreal. This was the follow-up to Thriller, the biggest album in human history. Yet Michael didn't flinch. Within days, stores were struggling to keep copies on shelves. In the US alone, it moved roughly 500,000 copies in its first week, instantly shooting straight to #1 on the Billboard 200. Globally, demand was even more explosive. Some territories reported overnight sellouts as fans lined up outside record shops before opening. By early 1988, Bad was more than a hit. It was a cultural takeover. 5 singles reached #1, a milestone no male artist had ever achieved. MTV built entire blocks around his videos. Radio programmers were calling it the safest bet in music. Everyone, fans, critics, even rival labels, assumed Album of the Year at the Grammys was locked in. But behind the scenes, quiet rumblings began. Industry writers hinted the Recording Academy was shifting towards serious rock-leaning projects. Some speculated voters were uneasy with the idea of crowning the same artist twice after Thriller's historic sweep. A few insiders even claimed an unwritten rule emerged to spread the wins instead of rewarding another Michael Jackson landslide. True or not, the tension was building, and it set the stage for one of the most surprising Grammy nights in music history. If Thriller made Michael Jackson a global icon, Bad proved he could do it again on his own terms. The album wasn't riding the momentum of a surprise breakout. It was engineered from day one to dominate. And it did. By early 1988, Bad had already passed 7 million US sales and was speeding toward 25 million worldwide, a number almost unthinkable for a second consecutive blockbuster. The singles were a storm. I Just Can't Stop Loving You debuted at #1. Bad, The Way You Make Me Feel, Man in the Mirror, and Dirty Diana followed, giving Michael 5 #1 hits from the same album, a record no male artist had ever touched. Every release became a cultural moment. His videos weren't just music clips, they were mini-films that MTV relied on to pull ratings. The Bad World Tour pushed the hype even further. Night after night, Michael walked onto stages packed with crowds so loud, security teams said they could feel the ground vibrating. In Japan, ticket demand tripled stadium capacities. In Europe, shows sold out in minutes. Michael wasn't just the biggest artist in the world, he was the biggest show on Earth. With all this momentum, the industry consensus was simple. The Grammys were supposed to reflect the year's impact. And if Album of the Year meant the record that defined the culture, then Bad seemed untouchable. But the Recording Academy in the late 1980s wasn't just judging sound. Rumors began circulating that voters had grown wary of pop megastars. Some insiders claim the Academy didn't want a repeat of 1984, when MJ swept nearly everything in sight. And that quiet resistance, real or imagined, was about to shape everything that happened next. To understand why Bad lost Album of the Year, you have to look at the Grammys of the late 1980s, a system that didn't operate the way fans imagined. Back then, the Recording Academy was dominated by older, rock-leaning voters who often valued serious albums over commercially massive pop records, no matter how revolutionary they were. Charts didn't sway them, sales didn't impress them, influence alone wasn't enough. And this is where the shift really begins. After Thriller completely swept the 1984 Grammys, some insiders said the Academy became cautious about ever letting one artist dominate like that again. It wasn't a written rule, but critics at the time noticed a change. Voters were looking to spread recognition, not repeat history. Speculation, but widely discussed by journalists in the late 1980s. Meanwhile, U2's The Joshua Tree had exploded with critical acclaim. It was powerful, political, rock-driven, exactly the kind of project the Academy historically gravitated towards. Reviewers called it serious, timeless, and artistically significant, labels the Academy had always rewarded. Michael's problem wasn't quality. Bad was a polished, innovative pop machine. His challenge was perception. The Academy still saw him as the face of mainstream megapop, a category they rarely crowned as Album of the Year. Quincy Jones would later mention publicly that Grammy voting had deep political undercurrents, hinting that popularity could actually work against an artist in certain categories. And he wasn't wrong. The 1980s Grammys had a track record of choosing prestige over impact. So even before the ceremony began, the atmosphere was shifting. The votes weren't just about music. They were about image, identity, and the Academy's idea of serious artistry. And that quiet internal bias was about to collide headfirst with the biggest star in the world. As Bad dominated the world, something else was happening. Something quieter, harder to measure, but powerful enough to influence a vote. By late 1987, the media narrative around Michael Jackson had begun to shift. Instead of focusing on his music, tabloids were building an entirely different story, the eccentric superstar. Headlines obsessed over his appearance, his lifestyle, and every minor rumor they could twist into a spectacle. This constant noise created what industry writers called Jackson fatigue. Not among fans, but among critics and insiders who were growing numb to the idea of Michael winning everything again. And the Grammy voters, many of whom paid close attention to press cycles, weren't immune to it. Some journalists at the time claimed that the Academy had started gravitating towards artists who fit a more authentic or serious mold, distancing themselves from highly commercial acts. Others whispered that voters didn't want to appear like they were handing the industry's highest honor to a global phenomenon, rather than a critical darling. This, however, is just a speculation. U2's image fit the moment. Political, gritty, guitar-driven. Michael, by contrast, was so massive that even his success worked against him. He wasn't just a musician, he was a cultural event. And to some voters, that scale felt intimidating, even polarizing. Behind closed doors, the sentiment grew that the award should go to someone fresh, someone serious, someone who wasn't dominating every chart and headline. Music journalists later pointed out that this era marked the beginning of a long-running Grammy trend, undervaluing pop giants while rewarding rock and alternative acts. Whether this shift was intentional or subconscious, it created the perfect storm. Michael's commercial power wasn't seen as genius, it was seen as excess. And that attitude set the stage for what happened when the envelopes were finally opened.
When Michael Jackson arrived at the 30th Annual Grammy Awards on March 2, 1988, expectations weren't high. They were absolute. The badges, the press, the critics, the fans outside the venue, everyone assumed he would repeat the dominance he showed just 4 years earlier. Bad had 6 major nominations. Album of the Year felt guaranteed. But when the show started, something immediately felt off. Category after category passed by, and Michael's name wasn't being called. Best Pop Vocal? Lost. Record of the Year? Lost. Song categories? Lost. Even categories where he'd historically been unstoppable? Gone. The room felt the tension. Reporters started whispering. Quincy Jones, sitting in the audience, looked visibly irritated as the night went on. The cameras didn't catch him often, but those who were there said you could read the frustration on his face without a single word spoken. Then came Album of the Year, the moment the entire industry had been waiting for. When the envelope opened and The Joshua Tree by U2 was announced, the shock wasn't subtle. It rippled through the venue like a cold wave. This wasn't just a surprising loss, it was the night's defining upset. Michael Jackson, the most successful artist on Earth, had been almost completely shut out. In total, Bad won 1 single award in a major category. Best Engineered Recording, Non-Classical. An achievement for the technical team, not Michael himself. For an album that shattered worldwide records, it was the kind of result that made people question what was really happening inside the Academy. Critics the next morning didn't hold back. Newspapers called it a stunning snub, an industry statement, even a course correction from voters who wanted to prove they weren't controlled by commercial success. But inside Michael's camp, the mood was heavier. Because despite the applause, the cameras, and the polite smiles, everyone who worked on Bad knew the same thing. This wasn't just a loss, this was a message. And the impact of that message would follow Michael long after the lights faded and the crowds went home.